So we're continuing this theme of Hezekiah and Isaiah. This is the final session in relation to Hezekiah that we're going to be undertaking. We're going to have a look now at the pattern for the latter days, the Gogian invasion. And we've laid the foundations for this, of course, already. Now, I had a look at this study and decided that I needed to cut a few slides out of it if we're going to have dinner this evening. So I have cut a few out, but I couldn't cut too many out for the sake of some sort of harmony, consistency in the flow. I'm going to start though with a Time magazine cover of 1979. And we have, of course, the Russian bear looking down upon what was called in those days the crescent of crisis. And we've spoken, of course, in our last session about how Russia will take control of the old Seleucid territory in order to fulfill 3 prophecies. How relevant is that cover even today? And that's, of course, where we are sitting right now with the Russian bear not only looking down, but they're also installed in Syria. Brother Thomas wrote in the preface of Help Us Israel, the future movements of Russia are notable signs of the times because they are predicted in the scriptures of truth. Now that's true in prophecies like Ezekiel 38, Daniel 11, etc. It's also true in the historical record of Hezekiah. And we're going to see that portrayed in this session. So the passage that I want to just focus on in 2 Kings 18 verse 7 is that passage which tells us that Hezekiah rebelled. I don't need to turn it up. It tells us that he rebelled against Assyria. So Ahaz, his father, had made the alliance. Hezekiah, when he came to power, decided that that wasn't an appropriate thing for Judah to be involved in. So he rebelled against Assyria. He was unfortunately to change his mind, as we're going to see. And we'll come to that in due time. But let's just reflect again on this phrase, the Assyrian in prophecy. We've been through the passages in Isaiah and Micah, and we looked at them. But I pointed out then, and I need to reinforce this, is that the context of these prophecies is very important. So, for example, in Isaiah 31 verse 8, then shall the Assyrian fall with the sword. In the next chapter, Isaiah 32 verse 1, could you join me in Isaiah 30? I'm going to be talking about Isaiah 30 to 35 in this next 10 minutes or so. So in the context of Isaiah 32, we have, of course, in verse 1, behold, a king shall reign in righteousness, and princes shall rule in judgment. So we know that this is a latter-day prophecy. It's clearly a prophecy of Christ and the saints reigning in the kingdom age. Isaiah 14:25 says, I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains I will tread him underfoot. And in the next verse, verse 26 of Isaiah 14, we read, this is the purpose that is purposed upon the whole earth. Now, it's not just about that historical event, it's what that historical event pointed to. Of course, the Assyrian was broken in the land when Sennacherib's army was destroyed, but that was to be a type. This is a prophecy upon the purpose of God upon the whole earth. And this is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. So we know it's a latter-day prophecy. Now there's a wonderful section in Isaiah that leads up to that historical portion from chapters 36 to 39. And then, of course, beyond that, we have the servant prophecies. This section from Isaiah 30 to 35 is one of my favourite sections in Isaiah because it gives you the program, the whole program of the events from Armageddon to the full establishment of the kingdom. I'd just like to walk you through it briefly, if we can. So, if you're in Isaiah 30, let's pick it up. Let's pick up the context in verse 27. We could step back a little earlier. For example, we could go back to verse 25 and look at the words of the end of that verse, which says, this is the time of the great slaughter when the towers fall. That's Ezekiel 38:20. Every wall shall fall to the ground. That's the time period we're in, you see. And we read then in verse 27 these words, "Behold, the name of Yahweh cometh from far, burning with his anger, and the burden thereof is heavy. His lips are full of indignation, and his tongue is a devouring fire." Now this is about Armageddon. It's clearly about Armageddon. And of course we looked at verse 31 and we saw that through the voice of Yahweh shall the Assyrian be beaten down, which smote with the rod. So there's no doubt when you look at Isaiah 30, it begins with this subject of Armageddon. Now that goes through to chapter 33, verse 17. Now between chapter 30 and 31 and 33, you have chapter 32. Remember how he pointed out that it begins with, "Behold, a king shall reign in righteousness." So the very first thing that Christ does, when he's destroyed the Gogian host on the mountains of Israel through the great earthquake, is he's got an exalted Mount Zion. He puts the throne of David at the foot of it. He begins, that's when the kingdom actually starts. By the way, that's where the 1,000 years of his reign starts. You want proof of that? You need to look at Revelation 20, verses 4 to 6. Because it says of the saints that they live and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. So when did that start? It starts at the time of the defeat of the Gogian host on the mountains of Israel. That's when he places the throne of David there. And we know this is true from Psalm 2. Because when the revolt of the Catholic nations begins, Yahweh says, "For I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion." So he's there as king. So the 1,000 years begins with the setting up of the throne of David. Of course, the next 40 years after Armageddon is a judgment period. This is the period of subduing the nations. But he has his kingdom. He's got the nucleus of the kingdom there in the land of Israel. So that's just a point, by the way. But what we have here is chapter 32 slotted in immediately after the events of the destruction of the Gogian forces on the mountains of Israel. But when you come to chapter 33, look at the early verses. Look at verse 1 of chapter 33. This is like a filling out of what we've already read. "Woe to thee that spoilest, and thou wast not spoiled." I mean, you can see the language, can't you? "And thou that dealest treacherously, and they dealt not treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled. When thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee." So we can see this language. It pertains to the Gogian invasion as is described in Ezekiel, 38. But there's a significant shift that occurs in chapter 33. If you come to verse 18 of chapter 33 of Isaiah, we've just been told that some passed through the fire. Maybe I should just take you back to verse 14. "The sinners in Zion are afraid, fearfulness hath surprised the hypocrites. Who among us," this is the question asked, "who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire?" Now we know what that is because it's just described the events that have to do with Armageddon. Yahweh's breathes out fire and the destruction of the Gogian host. So who among us is going to dwell with the devouring fire? Are we going to be there that day? Or are we going to be the subjects, the victims of it, as unfortunately some will be? "Who among us will dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings," or age-lasting burnings? So that's the background. But those who do survive the fire are described in verse 17. It says of them, "Thine eyes shall see the king in his beauty. They shall behold," what it calls here in the King James, "the land that is very far off." And that's not a really good translation. Rotherham translates it this way: "They shall see a land that stretcheth afar." This is the land promised to Abraham. A land that stretcheth afar. So up to this point you can see, can't you? You can see this is where the saints are involved. They're part of the judgments. They deal out the judgments upon Gog. They're there to share the rulership of Christ when he sets the throne of David in its place. And of course, flowing from that, ultimately is going to become the millennial peace that's described at the end of chapter 32. But there's a change. There's a shift here. And that shift occurs in verse 18 of chapter 33. Thine heart shall meditate terror. Where is the scribe? Where is the receiver? Where is he that counted the towers? The word towers, first used in the Bible, Genesis 11 verse 4. The Tower of Babel. And what happens here, and you can check this out for yourself, there are certain words used in this context from verse 18 onwards that are drawn from Genesis 10 and 11. And you don't find them in too many other places, okay? It's telling us something. There's a shift. For Christ and the saints now, having dealt with Gogian the land and cleansed it and done what they need to do, now they turn their attention to the harlot system, Babylon the Great. And that's what chapter 34 is all about. I mean, even the language of chapter 33 is clear. You come down to verse, let's just say verse 19. Thou shalt not see a fierce people, a people of a deeper speech than thou canst perceive. The most diverse languages, they say, are Hebrew and Latin. Okay, Hebrew and Latin. Totally diverse languages. That word speech is safar. It's first used in the scripture in Genesis 11 verse 1. They were all of one speech, and Nimrod's rebellion confused that speech, that tongue, right? Confused it. Even the words in verse 20, not one of the stakes thereof shall ever be removed. That's the word journeyed in Genesis 11 verse 2. Have a look at the trading of this power in verse 21. But there the glorious Yahweh will be unto us a place of broad rivers and streams wherein shall go no galley with oars. And it goes on in that kind of language, talking about the destruction of the trading, the religious trading of the Catholic system, which is the subject matter of Revelation 18. So the language shifts, because this section of scripture is actually about the overthrow of Babylon the Great. And that's going to take 40 years overall, but it's the last 30 years of that. This last 30 years. So you see this chart behind me? We've got Armageddon over here. We've got a 10-year period where the rebellion of the papacy and its supporters against Christ is established. And then you've got the hour of judgment of Revelation chapter 14 verse 6, the hour of judgment that comes against Babylon the Great. Now this is what Isaiah 33 verse 18 to 34 verse 10 is all about. Now I'm not going to have time to go into all the proofs of that. I'm just going to point you in the right direction. Now it has been thought in our brotherhood for a long time that Isaiah 34 is actually about some kind of conflict between Christ and a power, probably Gog, in the land of Edom, Bozrah. Okay? Not going to happen. Because Isaiah 34 is not about the events that precede or concern Armageddon. It's about the destruction of the papal system. Proof? Have a look at the language. It talks about the land of Idumea. It should be rendered Edom. The land of Edom. So what's the Edom of the Bible? Well, the Edom of the latter days is those powers that oppose Israel and Christ, those who seek to destroy Israel. And so Brother Thomas in Eureka deals with this quite extensively and shows and demonstrates that the Edom of these prophecies is Catholicism, latter-day Catholicism, the Jew haters, those who want to destroy Jacob, just like Esau wanted to kill his brother. I'd like to see what's happened to my poor old laptop. Might have died on me. So the proof that this is about the overthrow of Babylon the Great is the fact that in Revelation 14 verses 10 and 11, verses 9 and 10 are quoted. And so we know that this is about Babylon the Great. There's no question about that. And if you had any doubt at all, then Isaiah 34 verse 11 says, but the cormorant and the bittern shall possess it, namely the land of Edom, the subject of the context, and the owl also and the raven shall dwell in it, and he shall stretch out upon it, the land of Edom, the line of confusion, and so on. So you've got these unclean birds that inhabit the territory of the land of Edom. Read Europe, the centre of Babylon the Great of the latter days. We know that's the subject. That's Revelation chapter 18 and verse 2. Babylon has become the hold of every foul bird and so on, the cage of every unclean bird. So what is happening here, brought down into our language, is that when the system, Babylon the Great, revolts against Christ's rule, there's only one end for it. They have to be destroyed. They have to be utterly destroyed. And if you destroy them, their land is empty. So who takes it over? The unclean nations who have submitted to Christ, who don't have any nation or place to dwell. And there will be some, because the whole world's going to be reshaped. There will be nations that don't have any place to dwell. But if they submit to Christ, they're going to be given the territory of Babylon the Great, called here the land of Edom. So the point I want to make is that when you come to Isaiah 34, you're beyond Armageddon. So don't confuse it. This is about the time of the destruction of Babylon the Great, as indeed is Isaiah 63, when it talks about who is this that comes from Bozrah with dyed garments, etc., from the land of Edom. It's not about any conflict prior to Armageddon or at Armageddon. It's about the destruction of the Catholic system, because Isaiah 63 is the roots of Revelation 19. The treading out of the winepress of the wrath of God. It's Revelation. This is why the horse is mentioned in verse 12 and 13 of Isaiah 63 that's picked up in Revelation 19. So let the scripture speak for itself. It does a pretty good job. Right? It's just a matter of us connecting the scriptures together. Anyway, then it goes on, of course, into chapter 35 from 34:11 to 35:10 is actually about these nations who are the unclean birds that are mentioned in verse 11. So when you read about the redeemed in chapter 35, we would normally apply that to us. The redeemed, it's not about us. We're long since been redeemed. We're the ones in chapter 32 who are ruling with Christ. The redeemed here are the redeemed of the nations, the ones who are given possession of the land of Edom. All right, they're the redeemed, along with the natural Jew who will be recovered by Elijah and the saints in the second Exodus. So, just take your minds back to Micah 5. You recall how we were looking at Micah 5. And we know, of course, the context of verse 2 is that Christ was to be born in Bethlehem. In verse 2, he's to be ruler in Israel. In verse 4, he will conquer in God's strength. And in verse 4 again, he will be made great to the ends of the earth. So we know the context. It's about Christ. And it says, this man shall be the peace when the Assyrian, the latter-day Assyrian, shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces. Then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes of men. So here you've got the saints referred to again. 7 shepherds and 8 princes of men. What's a shepherd? Well, what's a priest? A priest is a shepherd, isn't it? Yeah. So here you've got the saints in their king priestly role. Princes of men. So you've got 7 and 8. What's that? 7's the number of covenant and of spirit, and 8's the number of immortality. So here is the company of the saints with our Lord Jesus Christ. And it says they, in the AV, it should read he shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword. And thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian when he cometh into our land. So we know that these events that occur in the time of Hezekiah are about the latter days. It's all really prophecy based on that history. Well, I reminded you, I think, at the beginning that Hezekiah made a mistake. He made a mistake of agreeing to pay tribute after he had revolted against the king of Assyria. Because the king of Assyria, when he received all of this stuff that came from Hezekiah, he pocketed it and said, thank you very much, that will go nicely in my bank account, but I'm still coming down anyway. And he did. So he made a mistake. Sennacherib invaded Judah, and this history, and I think I might have, here we are, I'm with it, 2 Kings 18 verse 13. So let's come to 2 Kings 18. We read in that record, I think, a little earlier, that it was in the 14th year of Hezekiah, he's now 39 years of age, that the Assyrians invade the land. 2 Kings 18 and verse 13 tells us that. And we read that this man Sennacherib has decided that he's going to come down. Now Sennacherib means sin, and sin is not sin transgression in this context. Sin was the name of the moon god that Abraham once served. And so in Ur the Chaldees, sin, that is the moon god, has multiplied the brothers, is the meaning. He's the son of Sargon. And he comes down, and according to Assyrian inscriptions, they took 46 cities in all. And the invasion went a little bit like this. The first invasion, BC 700, captured those 46 cities. And so he takes these 46 cities. The first invasion was BC 700. You've got some sun there, David. That's a problem with it. He receives a ransom and retires to Nineveh. And the second invasion is BC 699, so it's shortly thereafter, on hearing a rumour that Judah has an alliance with Egypt. And there was, of course, we know, there was an Egypt party in Judah. So the message got back, so he comes down, he defeats the Egyptians, and then, of course, he goes back to Jerusalem. He's not there very long, and his army is destroyed. So this is how it happens. Now, Sennacherib, of course, being like most of these Assyrian kings, was boasting about his achievements. And he wrote this on the inscription of that stele thing. He said, "Because Hezekiah, king of Judah, would not submit to my yoke, I came up against him, and by force of arms and by the might of my power I took 46 of his strong fenced cities, and of the smaller towns which were scattered about I took and plundered a countless number. From these places I took and carried off 200,156 persons, old and young, male and female, together with horses and mules, asses and camels, oxen and sheep, a countless multitude. And Hezekiah himself I shut up in Jerusalem, his capital city, like a bird in a cage, building towers round the city to hem him in, and raising banks of earth against the gates so as to prevent escape." Rubbish. He's telling lies. I'm going to show you he's telling lies. But you see, sadly, before this, Hezekiah has paid tribute. 2 Kings 18:14 talks about Lachish, which had been a royal Canaanite city. It was one of the chief fortresses of Judah. It had a double wall, a triple gate. It was a place of immense importance because it was in the south, and so it was under attack. And of course, the Assyrians did some serious damage there. So when Hezekiah hears the reports of all of these cities and towns being taken, he says to the Assyrians in verse 14, "I have offended." And so he sends off tribute to try and get the Assyrian to back off again. 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold, a considerable sum requiring desecration, of course, of the temple. He had repaired the temple, and now he's ripping away the silver and the gold of the temple. He makes a serious mistake in this, because, as I said, the Assyrian accepts the contribution to his bank account, but doesn't change his mind as to what he's going to do. This is an indication of what we can expect in the latter days. The same pattern will happen again in the latter days. This must have been a terribly distasteful task for Hezekiah, who had repaired the house of God. Verse 16 says in 2 Kings chapter 18 that he cut off the gold from the doors. He'd opened these doors and repaired the place. See, now he's cutting off the gold. He was to learn, wasn't he, that it was only Yahweh who could save him from the hand of the Assyrian. So this is one of those little sad incidents in the life of Hezekiah, and I don't think we can criticise him too much, because most of us would probably have done the same. You know, pay off the Assyrians, see if he can back off. He needed to put his trust in Yahweh, and of course he prepared defences. He'd done all that he could. We read in 2 Chronicles 32 verse 1. You might want to come along to 2 Chronicles 32. We read these words. In verse 1, "And after these things and the establishment thereof," and of course the previous chapters are about his reformation and his Passover. So after this reformation, the repairing of the temple, all sorts of things had been done. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered into Judah and encamped against the fenced cities and thought to win them for himself. So he was going to break into them, as the Hebrew has it. He was purposed, says verse 2, he was purposed to fight against Jerusalem. And so Hezekiah goes about preparing for that invasion. He prepares the leaders. In 2 Chronicles 32 verse 2, he begins this process of preparing Jerusalem and its people for this invasion. The verse 3 talks about his princes and mighty men with whom he takes counsel to stop the waters of the fountains which were without the city. So this is where Hezekiah's tunnel comes from. The only problem with all of that was Isaiah 22 verse 11 says, "Ye made a ditch between the two walls for the water of the old pool, but ye have not looked unto the maker thereof, neither had respect unto him that fashioned it long ago." So the only answer, as we saw in the previous study, was to turn to Yahweh. And that's one of the great things about this man. Prepared to go where he could find help, and he knew he could trust in Yahweh. And his faithful reaction, of course, is well known. Now, this is all history that points to the future. And where the Assyrian came to at that time is where Gog of the latter days will come to. And we read in Isaiah 10, verses 28 to 32, "He is come to Aeth, he is passed to Migron. At Michmash he hath laid up his carriages. They are gone over the passage. They have taken up their lodging at Geba. Ramah is afraid. Gibeah of Saul is fled. Lift up thy voice, O daughter of Gallim. Cause it to be heard unto Laish. O poor Anathoth. Madmenah is removed. The inhabitants of Gebim gather themselves to flee. As yet shall he remain at Nob that day. He shall shake his hand against the mount of the daughter of Zion, the hill of Jerusalem." Well, as you can see, all of those places are where? Fairly and squarely in the middle of the mountains of Israel. And when Gog comes down, he comes down upon the mountains of Israel. So the patterns are set for the latter days in this Assyrian invasion. And as we know, Sennacherib's army was decimated by the loss of 185,000 men in one night outside the walls of Jerusalem. And so when Isaiah sends off to Yahweh, he gets this comforting message. 2 Kings 19 verse 20. "I have heard," says Yahweh, "I've heard." And he says to him in 2 Kings 19 and verse 21, which is where I'm now going to go, I want to just talk briefly about the virgin daughter of Zion, because this is going to lead us to the two things I want to focus on as we bring this study to a conclusion. We want to focus on a couple of very important things. 2 Kings 19 and verse 20. "Then Isaiah the son of Amos sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith Yahweh, God of Israel, that which thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard. This is the word that Yahweh has spoken concerning him. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised thee and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem hath shaken her head at thee." So they, of course, were under severe pressure. They were the ones being despised. They were the ones who looked like they were going to be destroyed, but the table would be turned. And so the virgin daughter of Zion would despise the Assyrian. They would mock them. Sennacherib's mocking would be turned back upon himself. So what about this phrase, the virgin daughter? Well, it's an interesting phrase because even Babylon is called a virgin daughter. You know that? Isaiah 47, Babylon is actually called a virgin daughter. It actually means those who are undefiled. In other words, the invasion is not going to overtake them. They're not going to be defiled by it. It looks dangerous, but they're not going to be defiled by it. So until Babylon was taken into captivity, they were a virgin daughter. That's the status of Jerusalem. This power is not going to come into Jerusalem. And this is the message. He's shaken her head at thee. You've reproached them, whom thou hast reproached and blasphemed, and against whom thou hast exalted thy voice, lifted up thine eyes on high, even against the Holy One of Israel. So here was this power of Assyria that was boasting about their capture of other powers, that their gods couldn't save them. They were full of pride and arrogance, and that was going to be overthrown. Now I'm saying this because this is the character of the latter day Assyrian, is it not? If you had to point to someone in this world today who was full of pride, national pride, and is dangerous to Israel, who would you point to? I think I know who I would point to. Vladimir Putin. So this is telling us something about the future. And of course, they boasted, and these are the slides I left out, by the way, on my laptop, so you're going to have to sort of endure as I just very quickly run through them. They boasted, but all of those boasts would come to an end. The record is set straight by God, here in this record of 2 Kings 19. Hast thou not heard, he says, so Yahweh rebukes the Assyrian for his ignorance and his temerity, that I determined this a long time ago, of ancient times, that I have formed it. I've known you, he says in 2 Kings 19:26. You're of small power. And so God is saying that he knew all along that this was going to happen, and he's going to actually bring this power to its end. I know thy abode, he says, and thy rage against me, and thy tumult. So this is what we read in the bulk here of 2 Kings 19. And he's going to intervene. Now this is the passage that I wanted to pick up. 2 Kings 19 verse 28. Look at it. Because thy rage against me and thy tumult has come up into mine ears, therefore I will put my hook in thy nose, and I will turn thee back by the way which thou camest. So what quotation are you going to have in your margin there? Ezekiel 38 verse 4. It is the language of the latter day Gog, isn't it? I'll put hooks in thy jaws, and I will turn thee back. So that's the quotation you need there. So this bridle that he talks about, of course, is a bit for camels in those days. And in verse 29 he talks about a sign, and this shall be a sign unto thee. Ye shall eat this year such things as grow of themselves. So he gives a sign to the virgin daughter of Jerusalem. And this is where the subject of the remnant begins. So there's two things I want to focus on. I want to focus on what Gog will do when they arrive at the walls of Jerusalem, because the pattern was set historically here. I want to focus on the remnant that are going to survive in that day. The remnant of the Jews who will be holding out in that city. So he tells them that there is going to be an escape for the remnant. They're going to eat the things that grow themselves, and they'll plant vineyards. And then in verse 30 he says this, and the remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall yet again take root downward and bear fruit upwards. So here we've got, as the RSV describes it, a surviving remnant. Of course it's an allusion to the name of Isaiah's son, Shear-Jashub. A remnant shall return. The zeal of Yahweh will redeem, verse 31. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion. The zeal of Yahweh of hosts shall do this. Of course, that's similar language to Isaiah 9 and verse 7. Now here's the verse 32. Therefore thus saith Yahweh concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with a shield, nor cast a bank against it. That's why I said that Sennacherib's inscription was rubbish. Because he said, we built towers against the wall and we put banks up. God says they won't do it. They didn't have time. They will not have time, and neither will Gog. And so we want to just explore this a little. Verse 34, God says, for I will defend this city to save it for mine own sake and for my servant David's sake. So because of his covenants to David, he was going to save this city, and a remnant would come out of that city and survive this Assyrian invasion. Now we know what happened to Sennacherib. He was to go back to his own land. And if you have a look at verse 37 of chapter 19 of 2 Kings, it says, it came to pass as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adramelech and Sharezer his son smote him with a sword. That happened 20 years later. He went back, and it was 20 years before his sons killed him, and Esarhaddon, his son, took over the reins. Whew. All that just to get here. All right, I'm going to finish off on this. Now, you've seen these slides before, events leading to Armageddon. So we have the many ships of Daniel 11, and they come down the coastal strip of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, into Egypt. All right, this is Daniel 11, 41 and 42. From Turkey down into Egypt. Gog conquers Egypt and becomes a cruel lord. They destroy the ships of Tarshish that will come in from Gibraltar. They're destroyed by an east wind. It's a reference to Gog's destruction of the British Navy. So they have to go down the bottom of Africa and come up through the Persian Gulf where their principal allies are. So the Western nations, as we call them, the Tarshish powers, fortify Jerusalem. Russia, or Gog, ensconced in Egypt, hearing tidings from the east, which is the activity of Christ and the saints, over in the area of the Sinai Peninsula, and tidings from the north, the news from Jerusalem about the arrival of the Tarshish powers. They go back to Jerusalem. Christ and the saints, of course, then move in behind. The Gogian forces left behind in Egypt are destroyed. So there's the beginning of the smiting and healing of Egypt. And then, of course, some of the Jews, many of them Russian Jews doubtless, are taken into captivity because their army is defeated. Then Gog is victorious in the land. But then we know what happens. Christ and the saints advance through the wilderness. They come up through the land of Edom and cross over the Jordan from the east like the rising sun, and their arrival at the Mount of Olives precipitates the great earthquake. We're all very familiar with that. Armageddon occurs, of course, and the Russian forces are destroyed. Let's dig into the detail a little bit. 2 Kings 19, which we've just had a look at, 31-32 says, "For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion. The zeal of Yahweh of hosts shall do this. Therefore thus saith Yahweh concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city." Notice this language. "He shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with a shield, nor cast a bank against it." So just as the Assyrians did not fire arrows into Jerusalem, Gog's army will be under strict instructions not to fire cannon or rockets or drop bombs into the old city. So the pattern that was set in old times will be followed again. And the Zionists, who will be protecting the old city, will cry out for help. Now, you might say, well, how do you know this? Well, I want you to have a look at Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14. Verse 2. "I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled." So what portion of the city do you think he's saying will be taken? You've been to Jerusalem? You've been to Jerusalem, you know that the city is spread out to the west. Spread right out to the west. And that will be taken by the Gogian forces. But read on. "The houses rifled, the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city." What that is telling us is that the Jews will fulfill their promise that they made in June 1967. You know what promise they made? They said, "We will never ever leave this place." They meant the old city. They meant the Western Wall and the Temple Mount. "We will never leave this place until the last drop of Jewish blood. We'll die here." And that's exactly what's going to happen. They won't die, but they will defend it. They will defend it. And because Gog will be under strict instructions from the head of the Russian Orthodox Church and from the Pope not to destroy the holy sites in any way, the Russians are going to have to take it by hand-to-hand combat. This is why it says that the residue of the people are not cut off from the city. So what will not fall is the old city of Jerusalem, the same area that we're reading of in Hezekiah's record. The city that Hezekiah once ruled, that will remain in the possession of the Jews. But in that city will be people who are defending that city, who will go through a process. They will have confidence in themselves to begin with, but when they are in this situation, they will realise that they're not going to succeed in their own strength. Isaiah 30 verse 19 says, "For the people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem, thou shalt weep no more. He will be very gracious unto thee at the voice of thy cry. When he shall hear it, he will answer thee." Hosea 14, 1-3 says, "O Israel, return unto Yahweh thy God, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. Take with you words, and turn to Yahweh, saying to him, Take away all iniquity, and receive us graciously, so we will render the calf of our lips. Asher," which means Assyria, "Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride upon horses, neither will we say any more to the work of our hands, Ye are our gods, for in thee the fatherless findeth mercy." This is the spirit that's going to animate the remnant that are holding out in the old city. Like their ancient counterparts, the Gogian army will camp in this valley as they lay siege to the old city, being held by a remnant of Jewish defenders. Now, how many men do you think you might need? You've captured the rest of the land, you've got your soldiers out there controlling the rest of the land. How many soldiers do you think you might need to take the old city from, quite a number of Jews holding out? It's got to be done by hand-to-hand combat. I reckon they'll use 185,000. I reckon they'll use 185,000. And at the moment, when they begin this process, Christ and the saints arrive on the Mount of Olives and kaboom. They're destroyed. That is what I believe this is telling us. The desperation of this remnant. Zechariah 14 verse 2. They will cry out to their God. Perfectly consistent. They will hold out consistent with their vow in 1967. We will never give up the Western Wall unto the last drop of blood. The Temple Mount will be in Israel's possession then by annexation. We know that from Ezekiel 38 verse 8. So there's a drama here. Gog's forces will be under that strict instruction not to destroy the holy places. Look at Ezekiel 36 verse 2. "Thus saith Adonai Yahweh, because the enemy has said against you, Aha! Even the ancient high places are ours in possession." They think they're going to win them. So the drama of Zechariah 14 is that in their final desperate moments, the remnant of the Jews holding out in the old city will see the arrival of Christ and the saints and experience the great earthquake that destroys the Gogian host and in fact destroys what they are defending. It will be a heap of ruins because Mount Zion will be exalted. It just so happens that the earthquake fault line runs through that old city just beneath the temple, the Dome of the Rock. It goes under the Church of All Nations, which is at the foot of the Mount of Olives. And ancient maps have the Valley of Jehoshaphat. See that there in the red, bounded by that red line on the screen? And the Valley of Jehoshaphat there. That's where, of course, Gog's army will be destroyed, according to Joel 3:1, Zechariah 14 verse 2. So the type is the perfect match of what happened historically in the days of Hezekiah. So we conclude with these words of Isaiah 14. Yahweh of hosts has sworn, as I have planned, so shall it be. As I have purposed, so shall it stand. That I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains trample him underfoot. And his yoke shall depart from them, and his burden from their shoulder. This is the purpose that is purposed concerning the whole earth. And this is the hand that is stretched out over the nations. So we'll come back to study 15, God willing, and hope we can get the machinery working. and have a look at Manasseh and the Babylonian apostasy in Judah, which is also a pattern for the nation of Israel.
BibleTruthAndProphecy.com is a worldwide collaboration by Christadelphians to help promote the understanding of God's Word to those who are seeking the truth about the human condition and God's plan and purpose with this earth and with mankind upon it. Bible Truth and Prophecy is part of a wider set of online resources provided by Christadelphianvideo.org for establishing just how far removed the true Christian teaching of the first century apostles is from that taught by mainstream Christendom today. BibleTruthAndProphecy.com is very much a standalone website, but benefits from our vast network of sites and resources and social media. Here are just a few of the things that BibleTruthAndProphecy.com offers. We have a good number of written articles supplied to us from brothers from all over the globe. These deal with first principle issues, creation versus evolution, the inspiration of the Bible, and so much more. We have a whole section of video study series. These are studies that have been posted onto our YouTube channel, but because of the difficulty of the search feature within YouTube, we have chosen to host on Bible Truth and Prophecy. So now every video you search for within the site, you can be guaranteed that it will be of a Christadelphian nature. We also have a preaching video section where any ecclesia is invited to download and use or embed these videos within their own ecclesial websites. We also have an exhortation service where we produce 2 or 3 exhortations per week, which we then circulate to brethren and sisters in isolation. We also have an ever-growing list of approved Christadelphian sites. We also have a page of live news feeds, so you can keep up to date with all the breaking news as it happens. We also have a section for the daily readings. Each day at around midnight we publish all 3 of the daily readings, and then later on in the day we publish thought for the days, often based on all 3 portions of the daily readings. Within each daily reading post there is also a link to enable you to have the Bible chapter read to you directly. We also feature Bible in the News videos which we have produced from the Bible in the News website. We also feature Brother Don Pierce's milestone snippets, which come out approximately 3 times a week. We also feature Andy Walton's weekly World Watch and other commentaries and analysis from other brethren on world news events. You can also subscribe to the blog and be notified of posts as they happen in real time, and also subscribe to the weekly newsletter which is provided by Christadelphianvideo.org. Every page and post on the site has the facility to be able to leave a comment or make an observation, so please take advantage of this and let us know what you think of the site.